Meteors!
Welcome back to Horror Month, and this month we are celebrating not just Stephen King, not just horror movies, not just George A. Romero, but comic books as well.
Yeah, why not? What do we got to lose?
Now, we just reviewed CREEPSHOW not too long ago, and back then they would bring out what was be called graphic novels. They still have these, but I don't think they do them as much anymore for movies. Of course, this is based on like the horror comics of the 1950s, back when they actually used to publish these. And this came out, I am assuming, the same time the movie came out. I would have to look that up, but I believe it, it was maybe the same week, maybe it came out before the movie. But of course, this is the companion to the movie, and the genius of Stephen King and George Romero and all these other people involved with this decided, well, we're making a movie that celebrates the old style horror films and old style horror comics. Why not bring out a comic as well that goes along with the movie? I mean, how cool is that?
Exactly. And what's so great about these stories in here is they took some stories that actually Stephen King wrote, but he was going to throw away. He was like, he didn't think they were any good. He was actually going to toss them away. Like, I can't do anything with these. And he, kind of set them aside. And then, I don't know who it was, if it was his publisher or his wife or somebody, picked him up and says, well, or maybe even George Romero says, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we take these stories and put them together as one anthology and do an anthology film? And the comic and everything kind of sprang out of that, because that's exactly what they were thinking of, was things like Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and all those old serial comic books and serial films and things.
So I have the reprint. Just about, I guess, 3 or 4 months ago, they actually came out with a brand new reprint of this comic. So that's what I have. Now Vince has the original comic that came out back in the 80s?
Yeah. Yes, this came out in 1982, back when the movie came out.
So we're going to show you, before we get into the review of this comic, the differences between this one, the reprint, and Vince's. So if you find one at a garage sale somewhere, you're like, oh my god, I just found CREEPSHOW, you'll know what to look for. Sort of what I did with the Carrie review I did of the book. So let's do that with CREEPSHOW real quick. So first of all, as you can see, the reprint is very shiny up on top and a matte surface below. Now Vince's...
Now, okay, I'm not certain if this was originally like that. I mean, when I bought this comic, it was rather shiny, but I've had it for so many years that it obviously has lost its sheen to it. So I've had it for a while, and the way I used to carry it too, I used to carry this thing around all the time when I was reading it, and mostly at school. So it kind of wore off after a while, and of course you can tell on mine, definitely it's got some dog-eared to it and some creases and things.
And the best way of finding out if it's a first printing is you just open up the cover and look. Now this reprint is actually made by a company called Gallery 13, and if you look inside, it just says, First Gallery 13 Trade Paperback Edition, May 2017. Now, Vince's says something a lot different.
Yeah, mine says a Plume book, New American Library. It also says text copyright 1982 by Filtrum Corporation. Illustrations copyright 1982 by Laurel Show, Inc.
And also, the other big differences between his and the reprint is the back of it actually is totally different than the original. The back actually has an updated recent picture of Stephen King, while Vince's looks like this.
Stephen King and his ZZ Top beard. It looks pretty creepy, actually, compared to your picture.
They just knocked this out. I mean, there's just so much amazing stuff that went into Creepshow. I don't think people even know. Again, Stephen King wrote this comic, and then George Romero made the film, and then they had the incredible, amazingly talented, just one of the best artists of all time, Bernie Wrightson, to draw the comic.
It's a fabulous comic, and the funny part about this comic book for myself was, I remember when the movie came out, I went looking and thinking to myself, boy, wouldn't that be great if they actually had a Creepshow comic? And I always thought that would be awesome. And then I actually came across it, and I was like, oh, they have one. And I tried for a long time to get one, but being I was young, my mom, of course, didn't want me to get into horror films or horror things. So she was kind of like the dad in the movie. I don't want you having that stuff. But eventually, I was able to get my own job and make my own money, and I went down to a bookstore and became friends with the lady who operated the bookstore. And I was talking to her one day and said, hey, I'd really like to get a hold of Creepshow. And she goes, oh, I think we have that. And I said, you do? And she says, yeah, I believe we have it. If not, I can definitely order it for you. Well, that's what she had to do. She had to order it, but it came in like really quick, within like days, which really surprised me. She got it really, really quick. And sure enough, it's the first issue of Creepshow.
Now, what's kind of cool, too, about the comic is the stories in here. They follow the movie, but some of them actually don't follow the movie. There's things in the comic that's different than the film. When the guy falls, he's like walking out there looking for Bedelia. And this is something, again, in the movie that always kind of bothered me. He falls down, and then the tombstone starts moving, and he just lays there. In the comic, if you read it, I'll show it to you right now, he falls down, and then Bedelia falls on top of him. And he can't move because she's laying on top of him, and then eventually the tombstone falls on him, and that's why he couldn't get up, because her body's laying on top of him. And the other thing I think is really cool is at the end of the comic, the very last shot is a picture of Creep, and they have Creep on the cover, obviously, but when Bernie Wrightson draws him, he looks so cool in the comic, and I think Creep could have been the next Freddy Krueger. He could have been the next Chucky. I mean, if they really wanted to do something, they could have made him so cool, and they didn't.
What they did do with him in the comic book is he actually talks. He actually narrates. There's parts where he narrates the comic. And they show that in the movie, but they don't actually show Creep talking. And they don't have Creep talking in the film. So that's one thing that's a little bit different than from the comic to the film. But I think he would have made it. I don't know if he would have been a Freddy Krueger, but he definitely would have been Tales from the Crypt. He would have been, the Crypt Keeper.
And the other thing I'm wondering about is when they drew the comic, if they didn't have Stephen King in mind for the Geordie character, because he looks nothing like Stephen King. I mean, everybody else in the comic pretty much sort of looks like the characters that are in the movie, but Stephen King in the story looks nothing like Stephen King. He looks like just a guy.
So, in other words, they didn't use Stephen King's likeness.
No, and I'm wondering if they didn't plan on him being in the movie, or in the last second he's like, oh hey, I'll do this role, why not? And that's why he's in there. I don't know.
That might have been it.
Overall, if you can find this reprint, not only is it a great comic, it's Bernie Wrightson. And unfortunately, we also lost Bernie Wrightson this year. And he was one of the greatest horror artists of all time, like I said. And it's just amazing to see his artwork in this comic. And the reprint is excellent. The pages are great. The coloring is really good. Everything about this is, basically from the original, except for the back cover they changed. But yeah, it's an incredible read. And, if you have never seen the movie, this would be a great treat for you.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. It's worth picking it up. Actually, I met one of my friends because of this because of this book. One of my best friends. It was kind of funny because, like I said earlier, I used to carry this thing around like this. If you look at the side part of my comic book here, it's all worn because I used to carry this book like this all through the halls of my school. I would carry it around with all my school books because I was reading it. And the thing of it was, I had just moved here to Florida, and here I was carrying this thing around, and I went past a group of kids that used to hang out by our band room, and there was like a little hallway there where all the kids just kind of hung out during recess or whatever, during lunch. And I was walking past there, and he finally looks at me and he says, "Hey, you got that book of CREEPSHOW?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, I've never seen that. Do you mind if I look at it?" So I showed it to him, and he says, "Do you mind if I read it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, go ahead." So he ended up reading it, gave it back to me, and I mean, that's how we became friends. We've been friends ever since.
So it's highly recommended this October that you pick up the CREEPSHOW reprint, or you can try to find the original. The original is worth, I guess, a small fortune. I don't remember what I paid for this exactly. Let's see if there was a price on the back. I don't see one. I think it was like $18, $19 or something like that. I don't remember the original price for this thing.
My original price was $6.95.
So yeah, I mean, it's a great comic, and there's so much talent involved with this. It's mind-boggling. It's like if you took Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and Peter Jackson and whoever's the top artist right now, and got all these people together and all the big actors and I mean, it would be almost impossible to do now, but back then somehow it all came together and we got CREEPSHOW, and that's why it still remains such a classic today.
Exactly. And I'm still get compliments on it. Anytime anybody's ever seen this comic book at my house or whatever, they're all like, "Wow, CREEPSHOW? I didn't even know there was a comic of it." So I show it to them, and they're like, "Wow, this is incredible. What, they don't even make things like this anymore," So that's what's really sad. But if you have a chance to pick the reprint up or whatever, I mean, it's well worth it.
Are we done with CREEPSHOW? No. Because you may not know, there is a lot of CREEPSHOW stuff out there, because I didn't really know this myself until I started researching the movie and the comic and everything else that we're going to be reviewing. There's quite a lot of cool stuff out there, and all month long we are going to be bringing you more CREEPSHOW stuff.
Exactly. So stay tuned, hit the subscribe button, come back for more CREEPSHOW, because what else do you have to do this month? What?